Tip number 5, a sense of space, trying to create a greater sense of space by using daylight penetration. Daylight is the most wonderful magnifier of space. If you can flood a place with daylight, it almost always feels much, much larger. If you can flood it with daylight, and particularly if you can bounce it around using pale colours within the space. This house, again, very typical type of house one would see, and this one happens to be in West London, but you see lots and lots of these sorts of houses all over the country. But you can see exactly what it was like. It was like its neighbour, with a little window here, a little window here, a little square bay, and a front door. This one was a bit overgrown, a bit low. The front of this house faced south, therefore the back of it faced north. The garden had very little light coming in through the windows at the back. So most of the house was very, very gloomy. What we did is we made a much larger window on the front of the house. No planning permission required. This was permitted development, not in a conservation area. Much, much larger window all the way up, split here. The bedroom up the top had a desktop that splits the two spaces together, and a little wall, so that we were able to get the light in from a very, very high angle. Inside the house, we took the walls out between the front room and the middle, and we put in this staircase, which previously had gone up that way, put in this staircase running that way, that was designed to be as visually lightweight as possible, as maximise the opportunity of light to come through from the front to the back. It's all about drawing the daylight deep into the north end of the house, because the daylight penetration really magnifies the sense of space. This little staircase actually is supported, it's all bleached out on this photograph, but it's supported on 72 very fine stainless steel wires, equally spaced, which not only carry the staircase but also stop you falling off, which is quite good. But you could equally do something similar with that in glass. A sense of space also in terms of, and I'm going to get slightly pretentious and architecty here, apologies in advance, depth of views and multiple readings of space. By depth of views, this is an example of a project we did recently, not far from here actually, in Fulham. In this particular case, you're standing at the entrance of the kitchen. In the foreground, you can see a kitchen island, the sink, the really working part of the kitchen. Beyond that, you can see a dining space. Beyond that, some folding sliding doors which have been opened, and beyond that, a courtyard garden. The key here is we've deliberately set up a view with layers that you're seeing through. So we're standing in one space, you're seeing through a second space into a third space, or even better, through a second and third and seeing into a fourth space. Those layers that you're setting up with deliberate views within your house really emphasises the sense of space. In this particular case, we're in a dining room. We're seeing through a breakfast area, through a kitchen to the garden beyond. Deliberately setting up depth of views, and that really enhances the sense of space. Multiple readings of space is where you get to see space more than once. In this house, which was done again many, many years ago, it's in fact the first house that I ever designed that was published in a posh architectural magazine, which I was very pleased about. And this very, very well-established highfalutin architect came and looked around the house and wrote lots of nice things about the way we designed it and put it into this magazine. And one of the things he said in that review was that we'd maximise the sense of space through clever, I think he said, multiple readings of the space. I thought, that's what we did. Excellent. I'll use that from now on. Clever multiple readings of space. Essentially, we had a very tight little site. There was no opportunity to put windows on the outside walls very much, so most of the daylight had to come down from above. That meant that we had to have great big voids in the first floor to let the daylight come down to ground floor. The whole design was dictated around these voids to allow the light to come down. So you can see the light flooding down here. We're standing in the kitchen, we're seeing through the hallway space to the dining room, through the hallway space to the living room, through the void to the first floor. Turning round, we're standing in the kitchen, we're seeing up to the bridge above the kitchen, through to the way through to the garage. But then come through to living space, you can see up to the balcony. So you might come into this house, have a good look round, take note of the various rooms on the ground floor, then you go upstairs, and then you'd see them again from above. And the fact that you've seen this space once, and then you've gone up to another place, vantage point, and seen it a second time, really enhances the sense of space. You get this multiple readings thing whereby you've seen these spaces around, and it feels like a huge, great house, and it's actually really quite small. Tip number 7, zoning open plan space. Now, zoning open plan space is very, very important. It's easy to make a space open plan. If you want to knock 3 rooms together and make one big room, that's easy. It might not be very nice though. It might feel just like a big splurgy space. The best open plan space is where there are 2 or 3 defined functions within that space, like for example kitchen, living, dining would be a very common example of an open plan space with several functions, and where you've got clarity that this is clearly the kitchen zone, this is clearly the dining zone, this is clearly the living zone. They're connected, but you've got clarity of zones. So for example, in this picture you can see very clearly, here's the dining table in the dining space, light above it, clarity that this is the dining area. There's a barrier here, you go around the back of that, you're very clearly in the kitchen area. There's an opening here, very clearly you've moved into the living room. There's clearly 3 rooms here. It's an open plan L-shaped space, but there's clearly 3 rooms. In fact, there's 4, because round this corner, again, there's a level of separation and there's a study. So it's one open plan space, 4 zones, great clarity. Now you can play with and fine-tune the extent to which those zones feel separate. In this particular case, the kitchen wanted to feel quite separate. So we've got a relatively high barrier here and a strong sense of separation. In another space, you might want to have less sense of separation. You might want to have more overlapping of the different zones. And that's something that you can fine-tune. People think it's a choice between open plan or separate rooms. It's not at all. There's 50 shades of grey, or even more, between one and the other.